The Spring Web dependency that we have added in the previous lecture, this is not a normal Maven dependency. All the dependencies that you see on this page, we call them as Spring Boot starter projects. Let's try to understand what are these Spring Boot starter projects and how they are different from a normal Maven dependency. Spring Boot starters are ready-made dependency bundles that bring in all required libraries, configurations, and auto settings for a specific feature. For example, in the previous lecture, while we are trying to build an web application with the help of Spring Boot, we selected a starter project with the name Spring Web. When we select that Spring Web behind the scenes, we are going to have this Maven dependency inside our pom.xml. As I said, this is a Spring Boot starter project. I can also prove you that this is not a normal Maven dependency. Usually with a normal Maven dependency, we get only a single library under the external libraries. But with the starter projects, you're going to get all the required dependencies that you need to build a specific feature. Right now, we are trying to build a web application. As soon as you add these starter project inside your application, all the required dependencies to build a web application will be downloaded. We can try to open these artifact ID with the name spring-boot-starter-web. You need to press Ctrl button and hold on to this artifact ID. Inside Mac, you need to press Command button. Let me click on this link and it is going to open you another pom.xml. Inside this another pom.xml, there are other starter projects. For example, there is a starter project with the name Spring Boot Starter. If I try to open this, it is going to open another pom.xml. In this pom.xml, the Maven dependencies are declared. For example, the dependency of Spring Boot with the version 3.4.3 and a dependency of Spring Boot Auto Configure. Similarly, there is a dependency to perform the logging of application. There is another dependency to use Jakarta annotations. There is a dependency to download Spring Core related libraries. There is a dependency to use YAML inside our Spring Boot web application. Similarly, we can try to validate other dependencies as well. Here, if I open Spring Boot Starter Tomcat, this dependency has a lot of other dependencies bundled. Inside this pom.xml, if you can scroll down, it is going to set up you an embedded Tomcat server where your application is going to be deployed automatically. Similarly, there are other Tomcat related dependencies also defined inside this file. So with the help of a simple starter Maven dependency with the name spring-boot-starter-web, we are able to set up all the required dependencies to our web application. Before Spring Boot, developers, they used to define all the dependencies related to logging, Tomcat, annotations, Spring Core, Spring Context, JSON related, YAML related, all the libraries they used to mention inside the pom.xml. Can you imagine how tough that will be? Defining hundreds of dependencies inside pom.xml. It is going to be a very tedious job, but now with the help of starter projects, it is going to be super easy. Spring Boot starter projects are like preparing a quick Maggi or a quick cup of noodles. When you buy this cup of noodles, you don't have to do much to cook these noodles and to eat them. You just have to pour some hot water and wait for a couple of minutes, and within few minutes, your noodles is going to be ready with required amount of ingredients. Very similarly, Spring Boot starter projects also, they are going to help developers to set up all the required Maven dependencies by just mentioning a single starter project dependency. They are going to reduce the manual setup of dependencies. They also avoid version conflicts between the libraries. For example, think like you're trying to use a Spring Boot version of 3.4.3. For this specific version, you may have to use a specific version of Spring Core, a specific version of logging library, a specific version of Tomcat library. All that version matching and resolving version conflicts will be taken care by the Spring Boot starter project. Otherwise, the developer has to do this job manually. Can you imagine how tough it is going to be? You need to mention each of the dependency details inside the pom.xml. After mentioning the pom.xml, you should also identify the correct version based upon the specific version of the parent dependency. All that is not needed with the help of Spring Boot starters. Developers, they can simply focus on coding instead of configuration. How they are going to work? We already saw this demo. Instead of adding multiple dependencies manually, you just need to add one starter dependency in our pom.xml. In case if you are using Gradle build tool, you need to mention the same starter project dependency inside the build.gradle file. Here I also have a example. This is how it is going to look like if you are going with a normal Spring project. Inside a normal Spring project, the developer has to take care of defining all the actual dependencies like Spring Core, Spring Web, Spring MVC, Tomcat Embedded Core. Here I just mentioned only 4 dependencies, but in reality you may have more than 50 dependencies to build a successful web application with the help of Spring Framework. Whereas with the help of Spring Boot Starter project, you just need to add a single dependency. With that, all the necessary dependent libraries like Spring Web MVC, Tomcat, Spring Core, all of them, they are going to be automatically will be pulled by the Maven and Spring Boot behind the scenes. I hope you're clear what are these Spring Boot starters. If someone asks you why should they use Spring Boot, this should be the first advantage that you need to highlight. Of course, there are many other advantages which we are going to explore throughout this course, but this will be the first advantage.